على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الأمين المتين الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa kunu ma'as sadiqeen. O you who believe, fear Allah and be with the truthful. In every corner of the world, Hazrat Gaus-ul-Alam Dastageer, Abu Muhammed Sayedna Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani Al-Bagdadi's Urs is being celebrated. He was born on 470 Hijri during the reign of Seljuki Empire, and he left this world on 561 Hijri on 11th of Rabiul Sani in Baghdad. Hazrat Gaus-ul-Azam Dastageer Sayyidina Shaikh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala and says that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, Kun fayakun, be and it is. That whatever Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala command to happen, it will happen. When you obey Him, whenever you will say, it will happen. Indeed, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has bestowed this blessing on most of His prophets, saints and special servants. And indeed, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala has blessed Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani with this power. First of all, Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani was not only Gaus-ul-Alam in Wilayat, in fact, he was also the greatest Imam in knowledge. He was Imam-e-Azam in knowledge. He was Imam-e-Akbar in knowledge. He was an extremely talented Mufassir. He was an extremely talented Imam in Tafsir. He was an extremely talented Imam in Hadith, Imam in Fiqh. And miracles were one of his habits. And Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani used to teach around 13 sciences every day. Such a great scholar of Shariat and Tariqat he was. And every year, around 3,000 students used to graduate from his madrasa. I want to draw people's attention to things that are not often told. His miracles are not one but thousands. So this is the reason I said his miracles were his habits. So every year, 3,000 students would graduate from his madrasas. First thing is when Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi conquered Jerusalem, most of the soldiers in his army were the students of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala. Second, the chief advisor of Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi in this victory was Imam Ibn Qudama Maqdisi al-Hanbali. He was one of the disciple and Khalifa of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, who has acquired knowledge directly from Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala. Now look at this golden chapter, this beautiful chapter in history which has been written by Sayyid Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. This golden chapter which had been written in Islamic history had the blessing of none other than Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. Allama Ibn Taymiyyah writes in his book Al-Istiqama. He writes the miracle of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. And the narrator is Hazrat Shaykh Suhawardi radiallahu ta'ala. He states that when I had studied the books, I intended to study Ilm-e-Kalam. But I was confused about which book shall I study. Shall I read Imam al-Harmain al-Juwayni's book Al-Irshad? Or shall I study Imam Sharastani's book Bihayatul Aqdam? So my Shaykh Hazrat Abu Najib Suhrawadi brought me before Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala. So I thought that when the namaz will get over and the gathering will start, then I will ask Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani and do whatever he says. So I went with this idea. The prayers had not been offered yet and there was no gathering. The thought was in my heart. And suddenly, Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani turned towards me and said, O Umar, these books will not work in the grave. فَرَجَعْتُ عَنْ ذَلِكَ. I understood that Hazrat Gaus-e-Azam had discovered and guided me knowing the condition of my heart. So I gave up the idea of my heart. Allahu Akbar. This is the word of Allama Ibn Taymiyyah in his book, Inna Shaykha Kashafahu Bima Kana Fi Qalbihi. That Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala discovered what was in his heart. This was the status of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani says that 70,000 people used to gather in the majlis, in the programs of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala. Imam Ibn Hajar Asqalani said that his voice reached to every single person in the program, and that too the same voice was heard to the people in the last row as compared to the people in the first row as well. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, who was a great muhaddis, he arrived at Sayedna Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani's program, and Sayedna Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani recited a verse of the Holy Quran and then explained its interpretation, its tafsir. So Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, who was accompanied by another Imam, that Imam asked Ibn al-Jawzi, did he knew this interpretation? He said, yes, I knew this interpretation. Then Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani narrated the second interpretation. Then another Imam asked again, did he knew this interpretation? Imam Ibn al-Jawzi said, yes, I knew this interpretation as well. Similarly, up to 11 interpretation, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi said, yes, I knew this interpretation. But after that, Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani gave up to of a total of 40 interpretation. And Imam Ibn al-Jawzi said, I knew only the first 11 interpretation and the rest 29 interpretation I did not know. Today, I heard all the interpretation from Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. Allahu Akbar. But this is not it. When 40 interpretations have been narrated, then Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani said, Al-an narji min al-qal ila al-hal. Now we leave the interpretation of qal and come to the interpretation of hal, of the present. So when the first interpretation of the present of the hal was narrated, the whole assembly got agitated. Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, who was the muhaddis zamana, he tore his clothes and fell to the ground in a state of ecstasy. This was the knowledge of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. Allahu Akbar. Imam-e-Yafi, he writes a poem, an ashar in Miratul Janal. Ghawthul Wara, Ghaythun Nada, Nurul Khuda, Badrud Duja, Shamshud Duha, Balanwaru. Those who think we use titles from our own, Imam-e-Yafi, who was one of the greatest Imam in the world, uses this title in his poem for Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. Similarly, Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali says in Az-Zair at-Tabaqat al-Hanabila, he says, Kana azhuwa zahidu shaykhul sari wa qulwatul arifin wa sultanul mashayikh wa sayyidul ahli tariqa Mohiuddin Abu Muhammed sahibul muqamati wal karamati wal ulum wal marifatu ahwal al-mashhura. These are just the title which he uses in his names. We have not created these things ourselves. But the glorious narrators, the glorious interpretations, the glorious Imam has been saying this for 900 years. Allahu Akbar. Imam-e-Zahabi says in Siyar-e-Alam Nubala, he says, Laysa fi qibar al-mashayikh man lahu ahwalun wa karamatun aktharu min Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. He said that there was no one among the great scholars and sheikhs whose miracles were greater than that of Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala. Imam Iz bin Abdul Salam, his statement which is quoted by Imam-e-Zahabi in his book, he says, Yakulu ma nukilat ilayna karamatu ahadin bit tawaturi illa Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. He said, until today the miracles of any saint have not been narrated as frequently, as repeatedly as those narrated from Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiyallahu ta'ala. The miracles of Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani has been said so many times that no other saint or wali is compared to him. Allahu Akbar. Hazrat Imam Abul Baqa said that he heard from Hazrat Yahya bin Najah al-Adib al-Noh that he went to Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani's majlis, and Hazrat Yahya bin Najah was a great writer, a great poet, and he was the Imam of grammar, he was the Imam of Noh. He says, I wondered how many poems will Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani will recite in his speech. So I had a thread with me that whenever Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani would recite a poem, I would tie a knot on the thread. So I tied the knot to the thread and hid the thread under my clothes whenever Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani would recite a poem. So he would hide the thread under his clothes so no one could notice. When many knots were made, Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani turned to me, and there was a crowd of around 70,000 people in this program, and he turned to me and he said, Ana uhillu wa anta taqid. He said that I untie the knots and you are tying the knots again. When Hazrat Najah heard this, he immediately stood up and he repented. Allahu Akbar. Such was the knowledge, such was the marifat of Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. Allahu Akbar. Imam-e Shafi says that Imam Abul Hasan Ali bin Yusuf bin Jarir al-Shafi says in Manaqib Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, he says this with 5 more quotations. He says that a woman came to Sayedna Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani with a son, and she said, "My son is very fond of you." And this narration has also been narrated by Mullah Ali Qari as well, and by Imam Zahabi in Miratul Jalan as well. The lady says that my son is very fond of you, so I thought to leave him in your presence so that he can become your servant and a dervish as well. She left his son with Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani and she left. When she came to visit her son after a long period of time, and his son was on his way for suluk and marifat, she found his son very thin, and saw that he was eating dry barley bread. So she came in anger and she went to the court of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani and saw that Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani was eating chicken, and after eating he was collecting all the bones at one side. The mother said, "You are eating chicken and my son is eating dry barley bread." Hazrat Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani told to the bones to be in your original form again, and slowly that bone started becoming chicken again. And as soon as she saw it, Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani says that when your son will reach this level of marifat, he can eat whatever he wants. Allahu Akbar. Such was the marifat of Hazrat Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. The Khalifa Mustanjad Billah, he comes to Gaus-ul-Alam and offers him 20 bags of dinars of gold. Gaus-ul-Alam said, "Take it, I do not need it." He kept on insisting to take it. So Gaus-ul-Alam picked the sacks which was in the most perfect state and took it in his hand. He picked up 2 sacks in his hand and squeezed the sack of dinar of the gold, and as soon as he squeezed the sack, blood started dripping from the sack full of dinars. He said that, take the bags, you are a tyrant, you do not fear Allah, you suck the blood of the people, you rob their wealth and you bring it to me as a gift." Allahu Akbar. This is the wisdom of Gaus-ul-Azam. This is the knowledge of Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, and this has been narrated by Hazrat Abul Abbas Khuzri. The blessing of Wilayat, the blessing of guardianship comes from a Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam to Siddiq-e-Akbar, and from him to Hazrat Farooq-e-Azam, and from him to Hazrat Usman-e-Ghani, and from him to Hazrat Maula Ali, and from him to Imam-e-Hasan, and from him to Imam-e-Hussain, and from him to Imam-e-Zainul Abidin, and from him to Muhammed Baqir, and from him to Imam-e-Jafar al-Sadiq, and from him to Musa Qazim, and from him Ali Rosa, and from him Imam-e-Jawad, and from him to Imam-e-Naqi, and from him to Imam-e-Taqi, and from him to Imam-e-Hasan Askari, and until the 12th Imam, Imam-e-Mahdi does not appear. This Wilayat, this guardianship will be held by Gaus-ul-Azam. There can be no guardian in the east, west, south and north unless the seal of Gaus-e-Pak is affixed on him. Gaus-e-Pak says, "Qadami hada ala rakabatin kulli waliullah," that my foot is on the necks of all the saints of all the waliullah. A poet says these lines, "Wah kya martaba hai Gaus-e बाला तेरा, ऊंचो ऊंचो के सरों से कदम आला तेरा, सर भला क्या कोई जाने कि है कैसा तेरा, औलिया मलते हैं आंखें वो है तलवा तेरा." I shall end my speech here. Wa akhiru dawana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.